The polished chrome of the elevator doors offered Elias Vance a distorted reflection of the man he was supposed to be. There he was, 38 years old, sharp suit, silk Windsor tie, knotted with practiced precision. But the reflection showed the subtle truth the expensive tailoring was meant to hide, the exhaustion that clung to him like a second skin, the deep-set weariness in his eyes that no amount of success could erase. He was a senior analyst at Sterling Croft Investments, a name that carried weight in Atlanta's financial district, a name that was supposed to mean he had arrived. Yet, every morning, this elevator ride to the 45th floor felt less like an ascent and more like a daily surrender. He was, and had always been, the only black man in the senior analytics pool, a solitary island in a vast sea of white faces and old money. He smoothed his tie, a final adjustment to the armor he wore to battle, and when the doors slid open with a soft chime, he stepped out into the frigid, recycled air of the office. It smelled of industrial-strength coffee, leather polish, and an unspoken, unbreachable code of conduct. "Elias, my man, killing it as always." The voice belonged to Julian Croft, the firm's founding partner. It boomed from his glass-walled corner office, a fishbowl of power from which he observed his kingdom. Julian was the archetype of Southern corporate royalty, a mane of silver hair that looked sculpted by the wind on a golf course, a tan that spoke of weekend trips to Sea Island, and a smile so white it seemed to generate its own light. He strode out to meet Elias, clapping a heavy hand on his shoulder. "You, my friend, are a testament to our diversity initiative, a real success story. We need to get you on the cover of the annual report." Elias summoned a smile that felt like a facial tic. "Just trying to keep the algorithms honest, Julian." It was their well-rehearsed script. Julian would perform his role as the magnanimous, progressive leader, and Elias would perform his, the grateful, non-threatening, exceptionally competent minority who validated the firm's virtue. The weight of Julian's hand felt less like a friendly gesture and more like a brand, a marking of ownership. He swallowed the familiar, bitter taste of being both visible and invisible, praised as a symbol while his actual contributions were absorbed into the firm's collective success. He navigated the sprawling open-plan office, a forest of mahogany and steel, to his own desk. It was identical to the dozens around it, yet his felt different, scrutinized. He was a performer on a brightly lit stage, and he knew a single misstep, a single moment of authentic anger or frustration would bring the curtain down. That performance extended into the evening, bleeding into the sanctuary of his home. Their house, a handsome colonial in a quiet Roswell suburb, was meant to be the physical embodiment of their shared American dream. But lately, Elias saw only the flaws. A loose shutter rattled in the breeze. The porch paint was beginning to peel, silent accusations of a dream in gentle decay. These were the things that preyed on his mind in the dead of night, the mortgage that felt like a millstone, the ever-present anxiety of running in place while the world sprinted forward. He walked in, expecting the quiet comfort of home, but was met instead by the cloying scent of an unfamiliar, expensive perfume. Naomi, his wife of 10 years, stood in the living room. She was illuminated by the soft glow of a single lamp, a champagne flute in her hand, looking less like his wife and more like a figure from a glossy magazine. "Tough day, baby?" she asked. Her smile was a perfect dazzling thing, but it didn't quite connect with her eyes. There was a distance there, a new and unsettling vacancy. "The usual," he said, the words heavy in his mouth. He began to unknot his tie, the simple act feeling like the shedding of a costume. Julian's diversity initiative is still performing above expectations. A flicker of annoyance crossed her face before being smoothed away. "Let's not talk about work," she said, her voice a bright, brittle thing. "I have a surprise, something to celebrate." She gestured with her flute towards the polished surface of the coffee table. There, sitting on the dark wood, was a small square box wrapped in velvet. It was from a jeweler whose name he recognized, a name synonymous with price tags that had too many zeros. His stomach tightened into a cold knot. He knew their finances intimately. He managed their budget with the same meticulous precision he applied to his work algorithms. There was no line item for a velvet box from that store. He sat on the sofa, the leather cool against his skin, and picked it up. It felt impossibly heavy. He opened the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of white satin, was a tennis bracelet. It was a blinding, brilliant river of diamonds, each one perfectly cut, catching the lamplight and fracturing it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. It was the most beautiful, ostentatious piece of jewelry he had ever seen up close. It probably cost more than his car. Naomi... He couldn't force any other words out. His throat was tight. Where did this come from? It's a bonus, silly, she chirped, her tone a little too high, a little too forced. The art gallery I've been doing some part-time consulting for? We landed a massive collector from New York. The owner was just so ecstatic. He gave all the consultants a gratitude gift. He looked from the cold, glittering diamonds to her carefully composed face. He knew her tells. The slight quiver at the corner of her mouth when she was nervous. The way she avoided his gaze by focusing on a point just over his shoulder. He was seeing them all now. The story was plausible, but the delivery was a fraud. He picked up the bracelet. The diamonds were cold against his skin, their weight unnatural. This wasn't a celebration. It felt like a confession. This bracelet wasn't a gift for her hard work. It was payment for something else entirely. As he looked at his beautiful, smiling wife, her eyes glittering with a lie, as brilliant as the diamonds on her wrist, he felt the first tectonic shift beneath his feet. A hairline crack had just appeared in the foundation of his life, and he had the terrifying premonition that it was about to split wide open. In the weeks that followed, the diamond bracelet became a third presence in their marriage. It was a silent, glittering sentinel on Naomi's wrist, a constant mocking reminder of the lies she had told. She wore it defiantly, as if daring him to challenge her story again. He never did. The confrontation had been averted, but the cost was a chasm of silence that opened between them, growing wider each day. Her consulting work at the gallery, a side hustle he'd once seen as a harmless hobby, metastasized into a demanding, all-consuming career. Weekends were no longer theirs. They were claimed by private viewings in Buckhead, client meetings in Miami, and art auctions in Charleston. Her explanations were a whirlwind of names and places designed to sound impressive and leave no room for questions. The life she described was glamorous, fast-paced, and completely detached from the quiet, debt-ridden reality he inhabited. Their communication devolved into a series of logistical text messages and polite, empty pleasantries. The easy intimacy they once shared had evaporated, replaced by a tense, fragile courtesy. Her phone, once a shared portal for music and photos, became a fortress. It was always in her hand, on her lap, or tucked into her purse, its screen angled away from him, guarded with a vigilance that screamed of secrets. One evening, he came home earlier than expected and found her on the patio, her back to the glass door. Her voice, when she spoke into the phone, was different. It was a low, throaty murmur, punctuated by soft laughter. The voice she used to use with him, in the dark, when the world was shut out and it was just the two of them. The moment she caught his reflection in the glass, her posture stiffened. The warmth in her voice vanished, replaced by a crisp, professional tone. Right, the logistics will be confirmed by morning. The prospectus is on its way. Talk soon, she said, ending the call with a brisk finality. She slid the glass door open, a practiced smile already in place. Closing another big deal? Elias asked. The question was a lead weight in his throat. The biggest yet, she replied, breezing past him, the scent of her perfume trailing in her wake. The contemporary art market is absolutely on fire. He watched her walk away, the lie hanging in the air between them, as tangible as the bracelet on her wrist. The feeling of being a stranger in his own home was becoming suffocating. At the office, Julian Croft's intrusive presence became more frequent. He would materialize at Elias's desk, ostensibly to discuss market trends, but his eyes would be scanning Elias's screen, his questions subtly probing. It felt less like management and more like surveillance. Then, one Tuesday, Julian arrived with an air of grand pronouncement. "Big news, Elias," he boomed, his voice silencing the quiet hum of the office. Several heads turned their way. "It's time for our annual Senior Staff Appreciation Gala. My place on Lake Lanier this Saturday. Strictly black tie. It's the event of the season, a huge networking opportunity. All the real players in this city will be there. It goes without saying that you and the lovely Naomi are at the very top of my guest list." It was framed as an invitation, but it was delivered as a royal summons. In the rigid hierarchy of Sterling Croft, declining was not an option. It would be seen as a slight, a sign that he didn't understand the game. "We'll be there, Julian. Wouldn't miss it," Elias heard himself say, the words automated, hollow. The thought of standing by Naomi's side, making small talk with the city's elite, while that bracelet burned on her wrist, filled him with a cold dread. That night, the house was charged with a palpable tension. He found Naomi in their bedroom, packing a small, expensive-looking leather overnight bag. "Just the essentials," she announced with forced cheerfulness. "The gallery is sending the whole consulting team on a weekend retreat. Blue Ridge Mountains, all about team building and strategy for the next quarter." Another trip, another perfectly crafted lie. The proficiency with which she delivered it, the lack of any hesitation, was what twisted the knife. He leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed. "That's a shame," he said, his voice carefully neutral. He watched her fold a piece of black silk lingerie he had never seen before and place it in the bag. "Julian's big gala is this Saturday. He made a point of saying he hoped you'd be there." For a single unguarded second, he saw a flash of panic in her eyes. She froze, her back to him. Then she recovered, turning to face him with a mask of theatrical disappointment. "Oh my God, that's right. I completely forgot. What a terrible, terrible conflict." She walked over to him, placing her hands on his chest, her touch feeling rehearsed. "I can't possibly get out of this retreat, Elias. It's absolutely mandatory. My boss would kill me. You'll have to go without me. Please, make my apologies to Julian. Tell him I'm devastated to miss it." She kissed his cheek. It was a quick, cold press of lips against his skin. Later that night, long after the sound of her steady breathing filled the room, Elias lay wide awake, staring into the darkness. A tempest of suspicion, betrayal, and a profound, aching sadness raged within him. He couldn't live like this anymore, in this state of suspended disbelief. He needed proof. He remembered a conversation from months ago about an old tax document she needed for the gallery. She'd said she'd tossed it in her old handbag. An excuse. He needed an excuse. He slipped out of bed and went to the walk-in closet. The air was still and smelled of her perfume. He found the purse, a designer tote he'd bought her for their anniversary 2 years ago, back when things were different. He began to rummage through it, his heart pounding with a mixture of guilt and grim determination. He found the usual detritus: receipts, lipstick tubes, loose change, no document. But then his fingers brushed against something hard and unfamiliar, hidden within a zippered interior pocket. He pulled it out. It was a second phone, a sleek, black, anonymous-looking smartphone, utterly devoid of the personal touches that adorned her usual one. He pressed the power button. The screen flared to life, a sterile, glowing rectangle that asked for a passcode. This was it. This was her secret world, locked away from him. He stood in the silent darkness, the phone's light casting long shadows on the walls, a modern-day Pandora's box in the palm of his hand. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that opening it would unleash hell. Standing in the silent confessional of the walk-in closet, Elias felt the secret phone vibrate with a low hum, as if it were alive. It was a cold, alien object, a talisman of his wife's other life. Every rational part of his brain, the part that analyzed risk and calculated outcomes, screamed at him to put it back, to slide it back into the hidden pocket, walk out of the closet, and climb back into bed. To choose the fragile, fractured piece of willful ignorance over the catastrophic certainty of the truth. But that part of his brain was no longer in control. He was driven now by a more primal force, a desperate need to understand the full scope of the betrayal that had poisoned his life. He took the phone to his home office, the one room in the house that felt entirely his, and closed the door, shutting out the rest of his sleeping, dishonest home. The passcode screen glowed in the darkness, a 4-digit gatekeeper to a world he was not meant to see. He began with a cold, methodical approach, inputting the dates that had once defined their life together. Her birthday, 0815, incorrect passcode. Their anniversary, 10/2/2, incorrect passcode. The day they'd moved into this house, 0601, incorrect passcode. After the third failure, a message appeared. Phone disabled. Try again in 1 minute. The minute stretched into an eternity. He stared at the blank screen, his own reflection looking back at him, pale and strained. He was locked out, not just from the phone, but from the truth of his own marriage. He leaned back in his leather chair, the sound groaning in the stillness of the house. He tried to think like her. What numbers mattered to her, not to them? What secret personal code would she use to protect this other life? His mind sifted through a decade of shared memories, searching for a clue, a forgotten detail. And then a memory surfaced, soft and distant, from their early days of dating. She'd told him a story, her eyes alight with a nostalgic fondness, about a scruffy, one-eyed stray cat she had rescued as a child. The cat had been her constant companion, her fiercest confidant. She had named him Phoenix. It was a name she'd always loved, a symbol of rising from the ashes. It seemed too poetic, too on the nose. But what if? His fingers, slick with a nervous sweat, trembled as he typed. He tried the year she said she found the cat. 1998. Incorrect. His heart sank. It was a stupid guess. He was about to give up when another piece of the story came back to him. She didn't celebrate the cat's birthday. She celebrated the day she brought him home from the shelter, a date she treated with more reverence than her own. July 14th. He typed in the numbers 0714. The screen flickered and unlocked. A wave of vertigo washed over him. He felt both triumphant and sick to his stomach. He was in. The home screen was a stark contrast to her other phone, which was cluttered with apps and photos of friends and family. This one was Spartan, functional, messages, contacts, calendar, a web browser, nothing else. It was the phone of a spy. He tapped on the contacts first. It was a short list, mostly single initials or cryptic nicknames. But one entry made his blood turn to ice. JC. He didn't need to guess. Julian Croft. His finger hovered over the message thread, a moment of final hesitation before diving into the abyss. He tapped it. The screen filled with a history of deceit, stretching back nearly a year. It was worse than he could have ever imagined. It wasn't just an affair, it was a game. They had built their entire illicit vocabulary around the language of his own profession, a twisted, cynical mockery of his life's work. JC. Looking forward to our quarterly review tonight. The presentation needs to be perfect. Naomi. Don't worry, I always deliver maximum ROI. JC. The asset transfer last night was exceptional, a new market high. Naomi. Glad the portfolio performed to your satisfaction. JC. Confirming our off-site merger for the weekend, the usual holding company. Naomi. Confirmed. My domestic partner has approved the travel expenditure. He scrolled and scrolled, his breath catching in his throat. Each message was a fresh wound, a new layer of humiliation. His wife, his boss. They had turned his life into the punchline of a sick joke. Then, his eyes fell upon a group chat. The name was Red Phoenix. The irony was so cruel it was almost poetic. They had taken the name of her cherished childhood pet, a symbol of innocent love, and repurposed it as the banner for their sordid club. He opened it. The participants were a who's who of Atlanta's corporate and social elite. Names he recognized from Sterling Croft's board of directors, from charity galas, from the city's power lists. And their conversation was about this Saturday, about Julian's gala. JC, darling, the Venetian mask theme is simply inspired, so much more intriguing than last year's luau. One message read, Naomi, my love, are you bringing your husband or your A game? Can't be both. LOL, another chimed in. The final killing blow came from JC himself. Leave the domestic partners at home, everyone. Elias thinks she's at a corporate retreat in the mountains. He's too busy trying to prove he belongs to. Notice what's happening right under his nose. This Saturday is about asset merging. No liabilities. The room tilted violently. The words on the screen blurred. Too busy trying to prove he belongs. Julian hadn't just stolen his wife. He had been laughing at him, at his ambition, at his very existence the entire time. The gala wasn't a networking event. It was a swingers party for the powerful and the corrupt. And his wife wasn't just an attendee. She was a star player, the condescending compliments, the public praise of his diversity value. It was all part of the game, a way for Julian to savor his power, to rub Elias's face in his own humiliation without him ever knowing it. A cold, terrifying clarity settled over him. The simmering resentment he had carried for years had just been ignited. It wasn't a hot, explosive anger. It was a deep, glacial rage, methodical and absolute. He carefully placed the phone on the desk, the screensaver now a swirling animation of red and gold, like the feathers of a rising phoenix. The symbol of rebirth had become the emblem of his life's utter, calculated destruction. The world took on a strange, muted quality in the hours that followed his discovery. Time seemed to slow down, sounds became distant, and his own movements felt detached, as if he were a puppet being controlled by an unseen hand. He went through the motions of his Friday, a ghost haunting his own life. He sat in meetings at Sterling Croft, nodding and offering analysis, while Julian Croft presided over the table, oblivious and arrogant. Elias looked at his boss, at the confident set of his jaw and the easy smile, and saw not a man, but a monster cloaked in $1,000 suit. The urge to leap across the polished mahogany table and throttle the life out of him was so powerful, it was a physical force, a vibration deep in his bones that he had to suppress with every ounce of his willpower. When he spoke to Naomi on the phone that afternoon, her voice was a symphony of lies. She chattered about the dreadful trust falls and boring seminars at her team-building retreat. Her performance so seamless, it was breathtaking. He listened, his silence a stark counterpoint to her feigned enthusiasm. "You sound quiet, baby. Everything okay?" she asked, a hint of genuine concern in her voice that was somehow the most insulting part of the entire conversation. "Just tired," he replied, the words feeling like gravel in his mouth. "Long week. You have a good time." "I'll try," she sighed dramatically. "You go to Julian's party, network a little. Don't just stand in the corner like you always do. Make an impression." The condescension, once a subtle undercurrent, was now a roaring tide. She wasn't just cheating on him, she believed she was superior to him. Saturday evening arrived with a heavy, oppressive humidity that mirrored the atmosphere inside the house. From the upstairs bedroom window, he watched her leave. She was a vision in a scarlet dress that seemed to shimmer under the streetlights, a bold, declarative statement of a woman on her way to an assignation. She slid into her white luxury sedan, a car whose payments were a constant source of stress for him, and pulled away from the curb, heading not north toward the mountains, but northeast toward the lake. As the red taillights of her car vanished into the suburban twilight, a profound and chilling calm settled over Elias. The grief, the shock, the confusion. They had all burned away, leaving behind a core of cold, hard resolve. He was not going to the party as a guest. He was not going to stand in a corner. He was going as a specter, a witness to his own ruin. He waited for an hour, a calculated delay to ensure she would be well and truly settled at the party. He went to his closet and bypassed the tuxedo hanging in its plastic sheath. Instead, he pulled on a pair of dark faded jeans, a black hoodie, and a pair of old, soft-soled sneakers. His movements were deliberate, precise. He was dressing not for a social event, but for an infiltration. He was shedding the skin of Elias Vance, senior analyst, and becoming someone else, a shadow, an agent of consequence. The drive out of Atlanta on GA 400 was a surreal journey through the landscape of his life. The glittering towers of Buckhead, once a symbol of everything he aspired to, now looked like a city of fools, a monument to greed and hypocrisy. He drove past the exit for the hospital where his father had died, the exit for the park where he and Naomi had their first picnic, each landmark a ghost from a life that no longer felt real. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white, as the coded text messages played on a loop in his mind. Asset transfer, board meeting, domestic partner. The clinical detached language they used to describe their sordid affair was, in many ways, more painful than simple words of lust. It was a complete dehumanization of him and their marriage. As he neared Lake Lanier, the city lights receded and the world grew dark. The roads became narrow and winding, hemmed in by a dense forest of pine and oak that seemed to swallow the light from his headlights. The lake had a dark local legend, a reputation for being haunted, for pulling people under. Tonight, the folklore felt palpably real. The water, when he caught glimpses of it through the trees, was a black, fathomless void. He turned onto the long, private road leading to Julian's estate. a path marked by an imposing gate of stone and wrought iron. A quarter-mile from the entrance, he killed his headlights and veered onto a barely there access lane used by park rangers, pulling his modest sedan deep into the concealing shadows of the trees. He cut the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the frantic symphony of crickets and the loud, rhythmic thumping of his own heart. Through the dense foliage, he could see the mansion, a blazing jewel of light and sound in the vast darkness. The faint, percussive throb of music drifted towards him on the humid air, a decadent, mocking heartbeat. He got out of the car, the crunch of gravel under his feet sounding like a gunshot in the stillness. He pulled his hood over his head, obscuring his face. The last vestiges of the man he had been, the husband, the professional, the good soldier, had been incinerated on this drive. He was now just a raw nerve of betrayal, walking toward the fire that had consumed his life. The perimeter of Julian Croft's estate was a declaration of war against the outside world. A 10-foot-high wrought iron fence, punctuated by severe stone pillars, enclosed the property. Atop each pillar, a security camera scanned the darkness, its small red light a sleepless electronic eye. Elias moved through the shadows of the woods that bordered the road, his gait silent and predatory. He was methodical, tracing the fence line, searching for a vulnerability in the fortress. Julian's arrogance, he reasoned, would be his weakness. A man that confident in his power would overlook the small things. He found it on the far side of the property, where the meticulously manicured lawn sloped down to meet a wild, untamed patch of woods that bordered the lake. Here, the fence was lower, more ornamental, designed to offer an uninterrupted view of the water rather than to repel intruders. And just outside the fence line stood a colossal, ancient oak tree, a silent giant that had been there long before Julian had carved his palace out of the landscape. Its thick, gnarled branches stretched over the iron spikes like a bridge, an open invitation from nature itself. Adrenaline surged through him, sharp and clean, purging all fear. He moved with a grim efficiency, pulling himself up the rough bark of the tree. The physical exertion was a welcome release, a way to channel the raging storm inside him. From the vantage of a thick, sturdy branch, the entire spectacle of the party was laid out before him like a diorama of sin. The mansion was an architectural marvel of glass and steel, its massive windows exposing the debauchery within. The multi-level patios were crowded with guests, their silhouettes moving against the warm glow spilling from the house. A fleet of luxury cars, Porsches, Bentleys, Maseratis, was arranged in the circular driveway like expensive toys. He swung his body over the fence, landing with a soft thud in a bed of azaleas, the fragrant blossoms crushed under his feet. He was inside the wire. He became a ghost, melting into the deep shadows cast by the artfully placed landscape lighting. He used a line of sculpted hedges as cover, moving stealthily toward the house, the thumping bass of the music growing louder, vibrating through the soles of his shoes. He crept up to a massive floor-to-ceiling window that offered a clear view into the main ballroom. The scene was surreal, a Bosch painting brought to life. Every guest wore an ornate Venetian mask, feathered and gilded, concealing their identities while liberating their inhibitions. He saw men in exquisitely tailored tuxedos and women in gowns that shimmered like liquid metal. Champagne flowed from magnum bottles, served by a silent, uniformed staff whose faces were impassive masks of their own. He watched, his breath misting the cool glass. A grotesque parody of a high society dance was underway. Partners were being swapped with a fluid, practiced ease that suggested this was not a novelty, but a regular ritual. He recognized a prominent city councilman dancing with the wife of a well-known surgeon. He saw a senior partner from a rival investment firm, locked in a passionate embrace with a woman who was definitely not his wife. It was a writhing, glittering mass of hypocrisy. These were the people who ran Atlanta, who sat on boards and funded charities, who preached family values and corporate ethics. And here they were, their public faces hidden behind cheap masks, indulging in a secret life of shared corruption. The sight filled him with a profound, soul-deep disgust. It wasn't just the infidelity, it was the sheer, unadulterated arrogance of it all. He continued his clandestine circuit of the house, each window a new portal into their world of depravity. In a room that appeared to be a library, the books on the shelves stood as silent, leather-bound witnesses to a small group of people tangled together on a massive sofa. He scanned every room, his eyes a frantic burning searchlight, looking for a flash of scarlet fabric, for the woman who was the epicenter of his pain. His mind tormented him, painting vivid images of Naomi in this environment, her laughter echoing behind a mask, her body moving against a stranger's in the crush of the dance floor. The cold rage inside him solidified, crystallizing into something sharp, heavy, and lethal. He made his way to the back of the mansion, where the party spilled out onto a vast stone terrace overlooking the dark, placid water of Lake Lanier. The air here was cooler, the music slightly muffled. He found cover behind a large, decorative stone planter, the leaves of a tropical plant providing a perfect screen. His new position gave him an unobstructed view of the main balcony doors. He settled in to wait, his body coiled and tense. He was no longer just a man. He was an instrument of judgment, an unseen observer in the court of sin, waiting for the two chief defendants to present themselves. Time stretched and warped as Elias remained concealed in the humid darkness of the garden. The party pulsed with a life of its own, a creature of light, sound, and sweat. He watched masked figures come and go, their laughter sounding shrill and artificial to his ears. He saw more than one woman in a red dress, each sighting sending a sickening jolt of adrenaline through his system, followed by the hollow relief of realizing it wasn't her. A paranoid thought began to creep into his mind. What if she wasn't here? What if the text were a bluff, another layer of a game so complex he couldn't comprehend it? But the cold, heavy certainty in his gut, the primal instinct that had guided him here, told him to wait. Patience was a predator's virtue. Then the floor-to-ceiling glass doors leading to the main balcony slid open. The figure that emerged was instantly recognizable. Even in silhouette against the bright interior, the confident posture and commanding presence were unmistakable. It was Julian Croft. He was holding two champagne flutes, their crystal bowls catching the light. He wasn't wearing a mask. He smiled, turning back to say something to the person still inside the house, his expression one of easy possessive charm. And then, Naomi stepped out of the light and into the moonlight. The sight of her stole the breath from his lungs. It was a physical blow, an invisible fist clenching around his heart. The scarlet dress was a slash of color against the muted tones of the night, a beacon of her betrayal. Her hair was swept up, exposing the elegant column of her neck and the glitter of the diamond bracelet on her wrist. Like Julian, she was maskless. Out here, on this private stage overlooking the dark water, they had no need for pretense. The performance was for each other alone. She took a flute from Julian, her fingers deliberately brushing his. It was a small, intimate gesture that screamed of familiarity. He watched, frozen, as Julian's hand came to rest on the small of her back, his fingers splayed possessively against the silk of her dress. It wasn't the tentative touch of a new acquaintance. It was the casual, confident touch of a man who felt he had a right to be there. They stood side by side, their bodies not quite touching, but connected by an invisible electric current. They were looking out at the lake, its surface a vast, inky mirror reflecting the distant stars. He couldn't hear their words over the thumping bass of the music, as that he didn't need to. He could read the story in their posture, in their movements. He saw the way she laughed, tilting her head back, a gesture he had once thought was reserved for him. He saw the rapt, focused attention she gave Julian, a level of engagement he hadn't received from her in years. All her light, all her energy, all her vitality was being poured into this man, on this balcony. The life she was living with him, in their quiet suburban house, was a hollow shell, a duty she performed before returning to where she truly felt alive. A strange sense of detachment washed over Elias. It was as if he had floated out of his own body and was watching a film of his life's greatest tragedy. The screen in his mind played a rapid, brutal montage of their 10 years together. Their wedding day, full of naive promises, the struggle of their early years, pooling their money to buy this house, the quiet, comfortable evenings that had slowly soured into silence. All of it, every shared memory, was being retroactively poisoned, rendered meaningless by the scene unfolding before him. They were all just part of the backstory, the setup for this devastating climax. Julian turned her gently to face him. He set their glasses down on the balcony railing. He raised a hand and cupped her face, his thumb stroking her cheekbone with a lover's tenderness. He leaned in, and she rose on her toes to meet him. Their kiss was not the furtive, frantic kiss of an illicit affair. It was slow, deep, and confident. It was a kiss that spoke of shared history and a shared future, a kiss of profound and damning intimacy. It was the definitive, undeniable visual confirmation of everything he had pieced together from the secret texts and his own gnawing suspicions. The image burned itself onto his retina. A switch flipped in his brain. The complex emotions of grief, sadness, and jealousy were incinerated in a sudden, blinding flash of pure, undiluted rage. The world narrowed to that single, perfect tableau of betrayal: his wife, his boss, their embrace a final, irrefutable judgment on his entire existence. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to banish the image, but it was permanent, etched into the fabric of his mind. When he opened them again, the balcony was empty. They had retreated back into the house, back into the party. But the damage was done. The man who had been hiding in the bushes, the wounded husband seeking proof, was gone. He pushed himself to his feet, his limbs feeling both heavy and electrified. The music from the house was no longer a soundtrack to a party. It was a war drum, calling him to action. He was no longer hiding. He was hunting. Elias melted back into the deeper shadows at the edge of the sprawling lawn, where the tamed, manicured perfection of Julian's garden gave way to the wild, tangled woods that bordered the lake. The roaring in his ears was a physical presence, a sound like a freight train rushing through a tunnel. He pressed his back against the rough bark of a massive magnolia tree, the leaves providing a thick, dark canopy. He forced himself to breathe, in through the nose, out through the mouth, a calming technique he'd learned for stressful board meetings, a pathetic tool from a life that now seemed a million miles away. He needed the red haze in his vision to recede, not because he was calming down, but because he needed to be clear. He needed to be sharp. His rage was no longer a chaotic fire. It was being forged into a cold, hard weapon. He had no plan, no endgame in mind. There was only a singular, burning imperative: confrontation. He became a statue in the darkness, a sentinel of vengeance. He watched the party begin to die. The frenetic energy inside the house dissipated, the music softening from a pounding dance track to a mellow, jazzy rhythm. He saw the valets grow busy, bringing a steady stream of luxury cars to the front entrance. Headlights cut through the night as the masked guests, their appetites sated, began their exodus back to their respectable lives. Each departing car was a tick of the clock, winding the tension inside him tighter. He kept his eyes fixed on the house, scanning every door, every window, waiting for her to reappear. An hour passed, or maybe it was a minute. Time had lost all meaning. Then, a side door, one that led from a quieter wing of the mansion, opened. Naomi stepped out, alone. She had kicked off her high heels and was carrying them in one hand, walking barefoot on the cool, damp flagstone path that wound its way through the garden towards the woods. She looked tired, her perfect hair slightly disheveled. She paused near a stone bench, not 20 feet from where Elias stood hidden, and lit a cigarette. He hadn't known she smoked. It was another secret, another small betrayal. She inhaled deeply, the glowing orange tip illuminating her face in the darkness. He chose that moment to reveal himself. He took a single, deliberate step out from behind the tree, the crunch of a dry leaf under his sneaker sounding like a gunshot in the quiet night. She spun around, a startled gasp escaping her lips. The cigarette fell from her fingers. Her eyes, wide and luminous in the dim light, struggled to identify the figure in the shadows. "Elias," she breathed, the name a mixture of disbelief and terror. "My God, what are you doing here? How did you get in?" "The front door was for guests. I used the liar's entrance," he said. His voice was a low, rough thing he barely recognized as his own. It was devoid of the grief and hurt she might have expected. It was cold. "How was the team-building retreat, Naomi? Did you all do trust falls?" A flicker of genuine fear crossed her face, but it was instantly smothered by a hardened, defensive anger. The cornered animal bares its teeth. "You spied on me," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "You followed me. You are pathetic." Pathetic? The word ignited something in his chest. He took a step closer, invading her space. The scent of her, perfume, champagne, and now cigarette smoke, was overwhelming. "Is that what you call it? I call it finding out that my entire life is a lie. Finding out my wife is sleeping with my boss in a mansion full of swingers while he laughs about his diversity hire behind my back." She flinched as if he'd slapped her. The mention of the specific term confirmed her worst fear. He knew everything. Her defensive posture crumbled, replaced by a raw, lashing fury. "So what if I am?" she spat, her voice rising to a shrill cry. "What did you expect, Elias? Did you expect me to spend the rest of my life watching you wither away in that house? Watching you come home every day with that same look on your face? That defeated, resentful look of a man who thinks the world owes him something it will never give him. I did everything for you, for us," he roared, the sound swallowed by the trees. "I worked 16-hour days. I swallowed Julian's condescending crap. I took all of it so we could have this life." And then she laughed. It wasn't a sound of amusement. It was a short, sharp, ugly bark of a laugh, the cruelest sound he had ever heard. It was the sound of utter contempt. "This life?" she sneered, her voice dripping with scorn. She gestured vaguely at the opulent mansion glowing behind them. "You think you gave me this? You gave me a mortgage and a car payment and a life of quiet, boring desperation. Julian gave me this. He gave me excitement. He sees me. You just see an expense on a spreadsheet." She took a step towards him, her eyes blazing with a terrible, righteous fire. "You want to know the truth, Elias? The real truth? You're not a fighter. You're a whiner. Julian is a winner. He takes what he wants. He doesn't ask for permission. He builds empires. You just manage accounts. And I am done living with a manager. I want a man who owns the world." Her words were surgical, each one designed to cut him to the bone. But she wasn't finished. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial, poison-laced whisper. "And Julian was right about you. You were a diversity hire. I was there when he talked about it. He needed a good one to put in a senior role to impress the board. You were his project, Elias, his high-performing, non-threatening affirmative action project. And you know what? I got tired of being married to the charity case." That was it. The final, fatal blow. She hadn't just confessed to adultery. She had taken his entire professional identity, the one thing he clung to, the proof that his hard work and intelligence had paid off, and she had declared it a fraud. She had confirmed his deepest, most corrosive insecurity, and, in doing so, had annihilated the very core of his being. The man standing before her was no longer her husband. He was a hollowed-out effigy, filled with nothing but a howling, silent scream of pure rage. The world fractured. Naomi's final words, charity case, affirmative action project, were not just insults. They were a demolition crew, leveling the entire structure of his identity. The years of quiet dignity he had cultivated, the relentless professionalism he used as a shield against the subtle slights and condescending praise, all of it was revealed as a fool's delusion. In her eyes, and in Julian's, he was nothing more than a prop in their sophisticated, cynical game. The man who analyzed markets and predicted trends had failed to see the utter bankruptcy of his own life. He looked at her, really looked at her, in the pale moonlight filtering through the leaves. The face he had loved, the face he had woken up next to for a decade, was now a grotesque mask of contempt. A faint, triumphant smirk played on her lips. She had delivered the killing blow, and she was proud of it. She thought she had won. "Julian is waiting for me," she said, her voice dismissive, as if she were speaking to a subordinate who had overstayed his welcome. She turned her back on him to walk away, a final, casual act of erasure. That was the moment the dam inside him broke. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was a seismic event, a complete and total system failure. The complex machinery of reason, morality, and self-control that had governed him for 38 years shut down, and something ancient and reptilian took its place. The pressure that had been building for years, the weight of every microaggression, every lie, every bill he couldn't pay, every dream that had withered on the vine, all of it erupted in a singular, cataclysmic release. He lunged. His movement was a blur of pure, unthinking instinct. He grabbed her shoulder, spinning her around. The surprise in her eyes was instantly replaced by a flash of genuine fear. For the first time, she saw that the man she had just verbally disemboweled was no longer there. Someone else, something else, was looking out through his eyes. "Elias, don't be crazy," she started to say, but the words were cut off. His hands found her throat. His grip was not the grip of a man. It was the grip of a machine, unyielding and absolute. He felt a brief, frantic scrabbling as her manicured nails clawed at his hands, his wrists. But the pain was distant, a signal from a world he no longer inhabited. His entire consciousness narrowed to a single point of focus, the pressure of his thumbs, the terrified, bulging eyes of the woman who had destroyed him. A small, choked, gurgling sound escaped her lips. Her body thrashed against his, a desperate final struggle for life. The world around him dissolved into a tunnel of red-tinged darkness. A fractured, lightning-fast montage of their life together flashed through his mind. Her laughing on their first date, her crying with joy when he proposed, her sleeping peacefully beside him, her face soft in the morning light. The memories were not a plea for mercy. They were fuel for the fire, ghosts of a life she had systematically betrayed and murdered long before he laid his hands on her. He squeezed harder, the inhuman sound in his own throat the only thing he could hear. The struggling lessened. Her body, which had been a taut wire of resistance, went slack. He felt the life drain out of her, a palpable, final surrender. Her eyes, which had been wide with terror, glazed over, becoming fixed and vacant, staring at a point somewhere beyond his shoulder, somewhere in the starry, indifferent sky. Her full weight slumped against him, a dead, heavy thing. He held her for a second, then let her go. She collapsed at his feet in a heap of scarlet silk and broken promises. The roaring in his ears abruptly ceased. It was replaced by a silence so profound, so absolute. It was a physical presence. The chirping crickets, the distant music, the rustling leaves, all gone. There was only the ringing void. He stared down at the still form on the ground. His wife, his Naomi. He had killed her. The red haze receded, and a tidal wave of ice-cold shock and horror crashed over him. His hands began to tremble violently, uncontrollably. They were alien to him, instruments of a monstrous act he couldn't comprehend. Panic, pure and primal, seized him. His mind, which had been a blank slate of rage, was now a screaming chaos of survival instinct. Get out. Hide her. Run. He acted without thinking, a puppet of his own terror. He grabbed her under the arms, she was so heavy, so inert, and dragged her off the path. He pulled her deeper and deeper into the tangled, thorny undergrowth of the woods. Branches whipped at his face, tearing at his skin and clothes, but he felt nothing. He found a dense thicket of bushes and pushed her body into it, a clumsy, frantic burial. He scooped up handfuls of damp leaves and loose earth, piling them on top of her, trying to erase the unforgivable splash of red against the dark green. Then he turned and ran. He crashed through the woods, his lungs burning, his heart feeling like it was going to explode in his chest. He didn't look back. He scrambled over the iron fence, his hand slipping on the metal, a sharp pain lancing through his palm. He sprinted down the dark access lane, the sound of his own ragged gasps filling the night. He fumbled for his keys, his shaking fingers unable to guide the key into the ignition. It took 3 tries. The engine roared to life, a profane sound in the sacred silence of the crime scene. He slammed the car into drive and sped away, tires spitting gravel, leaving the mansion, the lake, and the ultimate consequence of his broken life behind in the all-consuming darkness. As dawn broke over Lake Lanier, it painted the sky in soft hues of pink and orange, a serene and beautiful canvas that was a grotesque counterpoint to the ugliness hidden in the woods below. The first sign that something was wrong was not a scream, but a moment of confusion. A landscaper, beginning his Sisyphean task of cleaning up after one of Julian Croft's parties, saw a flash of scarlet fabric near the untamed edge of the property line. Thinking it was a guest's discarded scarf or dress, he walked over to retrieve it, muttering about the carelessness of the rich. When he pushed aside a branch and saw the pale, still hand and the vacant, staring eyes, the scream that had been building in his throat finally tore through the tranquil morning air. By 9 a.m., the Croft estate was no longer a private sanctuary. It was a sterilized and quarantine zone. A perimeter of yellow police tape created a stark, artificial boundary between the world of the living and the place where death had visited. Detective Lena Petrova, of the Atlanta Police Department's elite homicide unit, ducked under the tape. Lena was a force of nature in a department dominated by men. With 20 years on the job, she had a quiet, unyielding authority and a pair of dark, intelligent eyes that seemed to absorb every detail of a scene, filtering out the noise to find the signal. She moved with a purpose that unnerved both rookies and suspects alike. "Talk to me," she said to the first uniform on scene, her voice a low, gravelly command as she pulled on a pair of latex gloves. "Victim's a female, unidentified at the time of discovery," the young officer reported, his voice tight with nerves. "Looks like manual strangulation. ME's on the way. The homeowner, a Julian Croft, is inside with about a dozen overnight guests. He's lawyered up already, says he's cooperating but won't let us interview his guests without counsel present." Lena grunted. "Of course he has." She walked the flagstone path, her gaze methodical, sweeping from the ground to the trees and back again. The crime scene was a disaster, a Jackson Pollock of potential evidence. The soft earth was a chaotic tapestry of footprints from dozens of different expensive shoes. Discarded champagne glasses, cigarette butts, and cocktail napkins littered the periphery. "This is a forensic nightmare," she said to her partner, Detective Miller. "The party contaminated everything. Get statements from every single person who was on this property last night. Caterers, valets, musicians, every last one. And get a warrant for the security footage. I don't care if Croft's lawyer throws a fit." She made her way to the thicket where the body lay. The forensics team was already at work, their movements slow and deliberate. Lena knelt, taking in the victim. She was beautiful, dressed for a night of celebration that had ended in the worst possible way. Her practiced eye noted the details, the dirt caked under her perfectly manicured fingernails, the small, crescent-shaped abrasions on her neck where she had tried to pull her attacker's hands away. Defensive wounds. She had fought back. "This was personal," Lena murmured, more to herself than to the medical examiner beside her. "This wasn't a robbery or a random attack. This was rage. Close-up, hands-on, violent rage." The initial interviews, conducted in the mansion's opulent living room, were an exercise in frustration. Julian Croft, wrapped in a silk dressing gown and flanked by a sharp-suited lawyer, was a master of controlled sorrow and strategic omission. He identified the victim as Naomi Vance, the wife of one of his employees, Elias Vance. He described her as a friend and the party as an elegant masquerade ball. He and his guests, all members of Atlanta's untouchable elite, closed ranks. They painted a picture of a tasteful social gathering, their stories a carefully constructed wall of denial designed to protect their reputations and hide the party's true, sordid nature. Their alibis were vague, their timelines contradictory. Lena listened to the litany of lies, her patience wearing thin. The physical evidence was minimal, the witness testimony was a smokescreen, and the killer could be anyone. He could have been a guest, a scorned lover from within their circle, or an outsider who had crashed the party. The grounds were immense, a maze of gardens, woods, and shoreline. The killer had fled, and his trail was growing colder by the minute. Back at the mobile command post they had established in the sweeping driveway, Lena stared at an aerial map of the estate. "We're looking for a needle in a haystack full of needles," she said to her team. "We can't process every inch of these woods and shoreline by hand. We need an advantage. We need to cut through the bullshit and find a direct line." Her eyes fell on the dense, dark woods that stretched from the property line down to the lake. "I want K9, she declared. "Get me the best damn tracking dog on the force. I want Zeus." A call was made. Less than an hour later, a specialized K9 unit vehicle navigated its way up the long driveway. The handler, Officer Kent, emerged, followed by Zeus, a magnificent Belgian Malinois whose entire being radiated an intense, coiled energy. Zeus was a departmental legend, a dog whose nose had solved more cases than some detectives. As Kent led Zeus toward the crime scene, a palpable sense of hope cut through the frustrating stagnation of the investigation. Lena watched them approach, her expression grim but focused. In a world of human lies and deception, she was putting her faith in the unerring, primal honesty of a dog. Officer Kent brought Zeus to the spot where Naomi's body had been discovered. He let the dog take in the sense of the scene, the lingering odors of death, fear, and the trampled earth. Then he gave the quiet command, "Find him." Zeus didn't bark. He lowered his head, his powerful nose just inches from the ground, and began to work. He moved in a series of casting circles, his tail held low and rigid, his entire body a finely tuned instrument of detection. The dog ignored the distracting, overwhelming sense of the party, the spilled alcohol, the cloying perfumes, the dozens of trails left by the guests. His brain was filtering through the olfactory noise, searching for one specific telltale scent trail, the unique combination of a person's individual odor, mixed with the pheromones of extreme stress and adrenaline. For the better part of an hour, Zeus meticulously worked the area, moving from the body to the stone path and back again. Lena watched, her hands shoved in her pockets, trying to suppress a rising sense of disappointment. The trail seemed hopelessly contaminated. It looked like another dead end. But then, Zeus's posture changed. He lifted his head, his nostrils flaring as he tasted a faint scent on the breeze. He turned decisively, no longer casting about, but moving with a clear and defined purpose. He wasn't heading towards the mansion. He was heading for the fence. "He's on it," Kent said, his voice low and confident. He let out more of the long leash, allowing Zeus to lead. Lena and a small team of detectives fell in behind them, their boots crunching on the gravel path as they followed the dog's unerring progress. Zeus led them away from the main party areas, across a wide expanse of perfect lawn, directly to the section of the perimeter fence that was lower, near the ancient oak tree. The dog began to whine softly, pawing at the base of the wrought iron, his signal that the trail went up and over. While Kent praised the dog, Lena directed her forensics team. "Bag and tag everything on this section of fence," she commanded. "I want every fiber, every hair, every single scrape." Kent led Zeus out the main gate and around to the other side of the fence. Back on the trail, the dog plunged into the woods, navigating the undergrowth with an agility that was breathtaking. He led them, without a moment's hesitation, to the secluded, overgrown access lane. There, Zeus began circling a specific patch of gravel, sniffing intently at a set of faint tire impressions. They were different from the thick treads of the Park Service trucks. They were from a sedan. "Subject parked here," Kent stated, pointing to the spot. And he went over that fence. This was his entry and exit. While the team photographed the tire tracks and took plaster casts, one of Lena's younger detectives, a methodical man named Chen, was slowly scanning the ground near the base of the fence with a high-powered flashlight, despite the broad daylight. He was looking for anything the initial sweep might have missed. "Detective?" he called out, his voice sharp with excitement. "I think I've got something." Lena hurried over. There, nestled in a small indentation in the soft earth, almost completely obscured by a clump of moss, was a small metallic object. Using a pair of tweezers, Chen carefully lifted it into an evidence bag. It was a cufflink. It was silver, with an elegant minimalist design featuring a small, square-cut onyx stone. It was a subtle, expensive piece. It could have belonged to any of the dozens of wealthy men at the party, but its location was what made it critical. This wasn't lost on the dance floor. This was lost at the exact point of intrusion, the one place the killer was likely to have been. It was their first piece of uncontaminated physical evidence. Back at the precinct, the cufflink became the Rosetta Stone of the investigation. Lena bypassed the slow process of an official canvas and personally took a high-resolution photo of it to an exclusive men's jeweler in Buckhead she knew from a previous white-collar case. The owner recognized the design instantly. "That's a custom piece," he said, peering at the photo over his glasses. "We made about 20 of them 2 years ago. It was a corporate commission. A 5-year service award for Sterling Croft Investments." The room went still. Lena felt a surge of adrenaline, the thrilling moment when the tumblers of a case begin to fall into place. Within the hour, they had the list of the 14 senior employees who had received the cufflinks. As Lena's eyes scanned the names, one seemed to jump off the page in bold, accusatory letters. Elias Vance, the victim's husband. Everything clicked. The motive, the opportunity, the quiet rage of a cuckolded husband. It was the oldest story in the book. Lena's team moved with lightning speed. They pulled traffic camera footage from every road leading to Lake Lanier for the night of the party. They subpoenaed his cell phone records. The evidence came flooding in. A digital tidal wave that would drown Elias Vance. A traffic cam had caught his car, license plate clearly visible, heading northeast on GA 400 at 9:15 p.m. His phone had pinged a cell tower less than a mile from the Croft estate from 10:30 p.m. until just after 1 a.m., and at which point it began moving rapidly back towards his home address. "We have him," Lena said, her voice a cold, hard line. "Get a search warrant for his residence and a warrant for a DNA sample. The ME confirms skin scrapings under the victim's fingernails. Let's go get our match." The execution of the warrant was quiet and swift. When the team breached the door of the suburban colonial, they didn't find a man ready to fight or flee. They found Elias Vance sitting in his darkened kitchen, staring at the wall, a man who looked like he had been waiting for the end of the world. In the backyard fireplace, forensics found the charred, melted remains of a hoodie, jeans, and sneakers. On a partially unburnt section of the hoodie's sleeve, a small, dark stain was visible. A field test came back presumptive for human blood. The hunt was over. The trap had been sprung. The interrogation room at Atlanta PD headquarters was a sterile gray box designed to strip a person of all comfort and confidence. Elias Vance sat at the small metal table, the clink of his handcuffs the only sound in the room. He seemed to have shrunk since his arrest, the proud, professional posture he had cultivated for years gone, replaced by the slumped shoulders of a man crushed by the weight of his own actions. He stared at the scuffed surface of the table, his eyes tracing patterns that weren't there. He was a ghost, haunted by the events of a single, catastrophic night. Detective Lena Petrova entered the room and sat opposite him. She didn't bring a thick case file or a list of questions. She brought a single, small evidence bag, which she placed in the center of the table between them. Inside was the silver and onyx cufflink. "We found this at the scene, Elias," she said, her voice calm, devoid of judgment. "It was caught in the moss at the base of the fence you climbed. Your car was on camera heading to the lake. Your phone put you there for 2 hours. We found the clothes you burned in your fireplace, and we found your wife's blood on the sleeve. The DNA from the skin under Naomi's fingernails came back a few hours ago. It's a perfect match to you." She paused, letting the weight of the evidence settle in the silent room. "There's no more room for lies. There's no way out. It's over. The only thing left to talk about is why." Elias stared at the cufflink, this tiny, elegant object that had been a symbol of his professional achievement, and was now the anchor that would hold him at the bottom of the ocean for the rest of his life. A long, shuddering sigh escaped his lips, the sound of a man surrendering not to the police, but to the unbearable burden of his own truth. He looked up, and his eyes met Lena's. The emptiness in them was gone, replaced by a deep, profound, and fathomless ocean of pain. "Why, Elias?" Lena repeated, her voice softening slightly. She wasn't just a cop trying to close a case. She was a human being trying to understand how things could go so horribly wrong. "Why didn't you just divorce her? Why didn't you just walk away?" And then the dam broke. The story came pouring out of him, not in a torrent of excuses or a plea for sympathy, but in a flat, exhausted monotone, the words of a man giving a final, objective report on the death of his own soul. He spoke of the slow-building pressure cooker of his life at Sterling Croft, the constant subtle racism that wore him down day by day, the feeling of being an outsider in his own career. He spoke of the growing distance in his marriage, the coldness, the lies. He described finding the secret phone, the coded messages, the gut-wrenching moment he understood the full, humiliating scope of his wife's betrayal with the man who held his career in his hands. He recounted the drive to the lake, the torment of watching them on the balcony, and the final, brutal confrontation in the garden. His voice, which had been steady, finally cracked. "She wasn't sorry," he whispered, tears welling in his eyes for the first time. "She wasn't even ashamed. She was proud. She laughed at me." He took a ragged breath. "She told me I was a diversity hire, a project, his affirmative action project. She said I was a loser, a whiner, and that he was a real man, a winner who owned the world." He looked down at his cuffed hands on the table. "In those 2 minutes, she took every single thing I had ever worked for, everything I thought I was, and she burned it to the ground. She made my whole life a joke." He looked back at Lena, his eyes pleading for an understanding he knew he didn't deserve. "I didn't go there to kill her. I just wanted her to see me, to see the pain. But when she said those things, something inside me just snapped. The man she was talking to wasn't there anymore. I don't remember deciding to do it. I just remember the world going red, and then a terrible silence. Elias Vance was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His confession negated the need for a lengthy trial. Julian Croft was questioned but never charged, his powerful lawyers ensuring he remained insulated from the scandal his actions had helped create. The story became a fleeting headline, a lurid tale of high society adultery and murder, soon replaced by the next day's news cycle. But the real story, the real tragedy, was not about a single act of violence. It was about the slow, crushing erosion of a man's soul. It served as a dark and brutal lesson that the most devastating wounds are often not physical. They are the daily cuts of disrespect, the slow poison of deceit, and the crushing weight of a world that sees you not as who you are, but as what you represent. Elias Vance was a good man who was pushed past his breaking point by a betrayal so total it annihilated his very sense of self. And in the end, his story is a chilling reminder that the line between a loving husband and a desperate killer can be as thin and as fragile as a single, final, unforgivable insult.